Welcome to another episode of Safe Space, the podcast for next-gen family business leaders. Today we have a very special guest, Christian Busch out of Los Angeles. Christian, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Good to be here.
So Christian wrote this absolutely amazing book, Connect the Dots. So Christian, before we get started, can you share with the audience a little bit of background about you and then what got you into writing the book and why you wrote it?
Absolutely, yeah. So, I used to be that kid. I was thrown out of high school, had to repeat a year, and, turned that into my driving style, was this kind of reckless driver. I got my first car when I was 18, and then shortly thereafter had a car crash. All four cars completely destroyed, including my own. And I won't forget the policeman. He came to the scene, and he was like, "Oh my God, he's still alive." And, that stuck with me, that idea
Nice.
that I was supposed to be dead. And I asked myself all these weird questions, if I would have died, who would have come to my funeral? Who would have cared? Was it all worth it? And at that point, I had mostly depressing answers. And so it took me on this intense search for meaning, trying to figure out, what is life all about? And I read this amazing book, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, which is all about, how do we find meaning in crises, in tough moments. And I realized over the years, hey, I find a lot of meaning in connecting ideas, connecting people, and the sparks that come from that. And I think probably that's something we share, right? This idea of, bring those people together, connect them, and magic will happen. And so what I found fascinating on this journey, I started out as entrepreneur and then later went into academia, is that the most interesting, purpose-driven, inspiring people, they appear to have something in common, which is that they somehow are really good at cultivating serendipity. They're really good at somehow seeing something in unexpected moments, connecting the dots and doing something with it. And so I got really fascinated by this over the last kind of decade or so to say, is there a science behind this? We all have stories of serendipity, these unexpected good luck moments that are happening, but is there a pattern behind this that we can study and then learn from and bring to other people and hopefully, disseminate across the world?
So, lots of great stories in the book, lots of phenomenal examples. The research has been extraordinary in writing the book. What has been the common theme that you've seen with all the stories as it relates to serendipity?
It's interesting because in a way, when you, kind of compare it to blind luck is stuff that happens to us, but we don't do anything about it, right? And that's how a lot of societal inequality comes about. People are winning in the birth lottery, stuff like this. So that's the kind of stuff that just happens to people. But serendipity is active luck, it's smart luck. So all these examples you look at, they all have the same process where there's something unexpected happening, then we have to do something with it. So it's more of a mindset. So take the example, right? Imagine you're in a coffee shop and you have erratic hand movements like I do, and you accidentally spill a coffee over the person next to you. And that person looks at you slightly annoyedly, but you sense there might be something there. You don't know what it is. You just have a sense, hey, this seems like an interesting person. And now you have a couple of options, right? How you react to that unexpected moment. You either just say, I'm so sorry. You walk outside and you think, what could have happened had I spoken to that person? Or option B, you start that conversation and that person becomes the love of your life or your co-founder or your next apartment rentee. So the point is how we react to the unexpected, that interaction between chance and human agency. That's what I find fascinating across all these examples. It's not just chance happening, it's what we do with it. Is there something we can figure out what to do with it?
So I think all of us have had, those moments when we're like, I wish I could have, should have said something, and we don't. How do we train ourselves to trust that instinct as opposed to doubt it and following down the path and creating serendipity?
Yeah, I love that question because I think, so there's a lot of practices, and I'm sure we'll talk about them kind of in the day-to-day that we can use to have more serendipity. But I think your question goes to a much deeper level, right? To say, what are the kind of psychological undercurrents that we can somehow work on to make sure that, as serendipity happens or as the potentiality of serendipity presents itself, that we actually can act on it, right? And so I feel there's two things in there. One is, how do we learn to trust our gut over time? When you look at especially successful people, you will see that they will give you whatever good story why they made a decision, right? They will post-rationalize it. They will tell you, yeah, we looked at all the options and then we made this choice. yeah, you just trusted your gut, you made that decision, and then you came up with a story, right? And it's that kind of interesting thing where I think as you go older, right, you see patterns and then you start to trust your gut more. But I think with young people, when working with young people, we work a lot on this idea of, hey, try to listen into your gut and then try to combine that with what your conscious tells you. So kind of try to combine the two, try to understand. So for example, right, I still remember I was between choosing a startup early on in my career and like going into a consultancy. And I had this, being the German I am, I had this beautiful Excel sheet with like the kind of criteria, like career progression and everything, and I gave points to it. And the consultancy always won. And then I woke up at night one day and I was like, this doesn't feel right. Like it doesn't feel right. And so at some point I researched more and I realized, you know what, actually what I'm more interested in is the culture of an organization, how I feel working with people. And so I changed the criteria in the Excel sheet, and then the startup won. And so the long story short is that kind of interaction between listening into the gut, but then also trying to figure out what is it, not kind of a naive gut feeling of fight or flight, but like this kind of more mature gut feeling. And so I think that's a big shift, like from the naive gut feeling to the mature gut feeling that we can train ourselves. And then the second one that I find even more interesting is what are the self-limiting beliefs we all have where we hold ourselves back from having more serendipity because we don't feel worthy, ready, you name it. And that comes a lot back to, right, if you look back in your life and you think about all those moments where serendipity could have happened, but it didn't because you didn't feel worthy, ready, you name it, there's usually a pattern, right? So in my case, for example, it used to be fear of rejection, right? So you might bump into this amazing speaker at a conference, but you're like, but maybe they don't have time for me, or maybe my idea doesn't really work, or stuff like that. Or you're sitting in a meeting, right? You have this unexpected, amazing idea, but you didn't bring it up, right? Because you didn't feel ready, worthy, whatever. And then you walk outside and you think, what could have happened? And what I've realized is with fear of rejection, for example, that my brain usually goes to that worst case, right? So what if I do it? Right? If I do it, sting of rejection. But what I've learned is to reframe that away from what's the worst thing that can happen if I do it to what's actually the worst thing if I don't do it. The regret of going outside and thinking what could have happened. And that kind of reframing, now thinking about what's the worst thing that can happen if I don't do it, that develops that bias for action and kind of also trusting, hey, look, this moment is here, I got to act on it. And I think there's a lot there, I think, in terms of psychological undercurrents.
So in your book, you talk about the importance of psychological safety, right? And, psychological safety, we wrote a book called Safe Space, which is all about that. And it starts with self. So connect the dots between how one feels emotionally safe with themselves and the greater probability of creating serendipity versus the one individual that doesn't feel emotionally safe with themselves, constantly questioning themselves, chooses to listen to the beliefs of I'll be rejected versus I may have something to contribute.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because a lot of serendipity, right, comes out of the interaction between people, right? So, I mean, there is serendipity that comes out of the interaction with a broader environment, right? So you might read a book and think, oh my God, I could do a podcast out of this or things like that, right? But let's assume a lot of serendipity comes out of, right, me bumping to you at a conference and then us realizing, oh my God, we have similar interests, we should do a podcast together, right? So those kind of beautiful serendipitous moments that happen. And I think that the idea of psychological safety is so important because it's about do I want to trust you, right? Do I want to trust that I want to connect dots with you? It's always a little bit vulnerable, right? To connect in some way or the other. There's always something that you're opening up. And then am I actually willing to do it? Am I willing to somehow have my dots connect with you or not, right? And so I think there's a lot around this, especially also in companies. Do I create an environment where people are able and willing to connect the dots for each other? Or do they feel, you know what, I don't care enough to do it, or I don't feel safe enough to do it in the sense of I don't feel I can bring myself on like to the table. And I'm a big fan there of Brené Brown. She wrote this amazing book about vulnerability, Daring Greatly, right? Which is all about this idea of it takes courage to be vulnerable, but as leaders we can help people be vulnerable, not in a kind of oversharing, like I push everything on you way, but the opposite, in a way that says, I want to learn more about you. I want to know who you are so that I can really connect the meaningful dots with you. And so to give you one example of a practice I like there is instead of asking someone, what do you do? Asking someone, what do you enjoy doing? It's a very small shift, right? But if you're at a conference and I go to you and I'm say, Franco, what do you do? And you say, oh, I'm working with, family offices, like then it becomes directly kind of a box, right? In terms of, oh, high net worth, this, and so you're kind of like in this box now. Versus if I'm going there and say, hey, what do you enjoy doing? And you're like, I enjoy kind of pursuing knowledge and learning about people, and now I'm kind of like, cool, like I'm excited about that too. And so the real meaningful relationship comes once we allow ourselves a little bit to open that opportunity space. And I think for that, though, we need a little bit of that safety, which we can create ourselves more, right? Like working on our self-confidence and working on kind of our ability to trust others. But also then I think socialization is a big role, right? Like how we parent. I have a 3-year-old, so I think a lot about how do we parent to give our kids the self-worth to feel I deserve connecting with you, I deserve to be here. The opposite of entitlement. No, it's just like I feel I'm okay to be here.
So let's connect the dots for family businesses and next generation leaders that are listening to this podcast. How can they apply your teachings and your learnings around serendipity and connecting with their family members where traditionally they may have not have felt safe enough to be able to voice their opinions and to be vulnerable? How can they start to overcome that?
Yeah. Well, what I found fascinating, so I have a lot of friends who are now kind of, second, third, fourth generation, including actually my wife. My wife is also part of the family business. And so I kind of see it firsthand, like how these dynamics unfold. And we all know, right, that there's a lot of layers to it. There's a lot of complexities to it. There's very strong characters to it, right? There's a lot of legacy to it. So there's all these different dynamics that we somehow have to understand and also to appreciate in a way. Two things I found extremely helpful there is one is to learn what do I appreciate the other person, and to really kind of like voice that as much as possible. Because as you see, right, most family kind of conflicts I've seen, especially when you have businesses that grew like into good businesses where they're visible and everything else, it's the kind of thing where people constantly feel underappreciated, right? Because let's say the next gen person feels underappreciated because everyone's like, oh, but you didn't build this, so you're not the one who actually really understands it because you were just the one who kind of inherits it now. And then so kind of like in a way finding a way to appreciate, hey, look, that's actually a tough thing to do, to be in this shadow now and like to work on this. And so really appreciating that as a kind of first gen, or like whoever kind of is the dad or the mom, kind of really giving that down and saying, I appreciate you. I appreciate that this is tough. This is not easy to just kind of, be the one who was chosen for this. So, and I think that's kind of, the complexity of that. But B, I also think it's really about role modeling. It's really about this idea of how do I, as a patriarch, but also as anyone anywhere in the family hierarchy, this idea of talking about how life actually unfolds, right? Because everyone pretends that they know a lot, right? So yes, like we've always done it like this. We know exactly how it works, and this is how it works. This is not how the world works anymore, right? Like this was possible 30 years ago, but the world nowadays, right? Like I'm German, we love like having a plan which goes like step, step, step. But like life is more like a squiggle, right? It's like tick, 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 tick. And all these unexpected things. And so I've loved it both in family businesses and more broadly, this idea of really from time to time telling stories and saying, hey, look, like we wanted to do this, and then we put a culture in place that made it even better, and now we're doing something else, and that's amazing. Like it's a learning curve, and that takes I think self-awareness to say, I shift from pretending that I can always be certain that I know everything, that everything is always like predictable, to I can give you clarity of our values, of our priorities, of what's important for our family, what's important for our business. But I cannot exactly tell you how this will look like in 2 years because the world is changing too fast. And so I think there's a lot about this idea of, people in a way relearning what authority means. Authority is not anymore about pretending to know everything. It's now about essentially being that kind of person who gives clarity of values and so on, but doesn't pretend that they know everything.
So one of the concepts that I really enjoyed in the book was the concept of serendipity triggers. So can you explain that concept and how a family could apply that within their family unit to create more unity and harmony?
Yeah. Well, it's really a lot about, if you think about the world, and I know you think about the world similarly, if you think about the world as kind of like, there's all these people and there's all these networks. And so between all people and all different like, variables, there's all these different connections, right? And so there's so many potential connections, and it's not only between me and you, it's between all the different cool things we might do together that we haven't explored yet, right? And all this potentiality there. And so we need to connect the dots between those. And so I think a lot of times when we already know people, we think we know a lot about them. But actually, then when we go with them to an event, maybe that's completely different, we're like, oh, I didn't even know about you that this and this, or I didn't even know that this and this, because it brings out that other layer that we usually didn't talk about. And so I'm a huge fan of really thinking about Serendipity Trigger as something, what are these kind of interesting dots that we can put out there that make it easier for people to connect to me in a meaningful way, especially also if they already know me, right? So I'm a big fan of hooks. So the idea of, when I connect with people, especially also people I've known for a long time, and they ask me, how do you do? I try to put a couple of things in there that are really on my mind at the moment, just to kind of allow them to also kind of connect with me again on like a deeper level, rather than just, oh, my daughter is fine, this is fine. I'm literally, right? So, hey, Christian, how are you doing? Well, I'm doing okay. Like, our daughter just started dreaming, so kind of like that's a really new experience for me to see how I can reflect with her on it. And at the same time, also, with Serendipity, we're trying to explore now Zemblanity. We try to explore the bad luck by design, right? And so it's those kind of things where I'm just throwing this in, and then I let people pick the thing that they are most interested in. They're like, oh, great, like, Christian, hey, let's chat now in the garden about Zemblanity, because my aunt seems to have Zemblanity all the time, because she seems to always be in accidents, even though she has such a privileged life, right? And so it's those kind of things where I'm a big fan of really, in a way, allowing people to have potentiality. I think we sometimes put people, especially in families, into boxes where, like, you're the son of, you're the daughter of, you're the niece of, you're the this of. But actually realizing, no, a 16-year-old who goes to Le Rosé, right, is not just a student who now studies mathematics or entrepreneurship, which is really cool, by the way. I recently went there virtually, and they have like an entrepreneurship center now, which I think is great, or like an entrepreneurship focused thing. And so I think those kind of things where it's about asking them not only, hey, how was school in terms of like, did you get your grades, but asking them, hey, what is it that kind of at the moment is really what you want to explore? What is your curiosities? What are the things you're really interested in? And as we do that, we see people much more multi-layeredly, and that creates that serendipity of, oh my God, I didn't even know you're excited about aerospace entrepreneurship. I know a guy I can put you in touch with, and then magic things happen.
So what I'm hearing is really just about good old-fashioned curiosity and being interested in people for who they are, not what they do.
Yeah, and giving them the benefit of the doubt, right? Giving them the benefit of the doubt that, just because I met you, right? So when I'm in communities of, especially the communities that we're talking about now, right? Family businesses, high net worth, and so on, right? I feel like everyone has a certain idea of everyone, right? So everyone's like, okay, this is the kind of like
Right.
boring, self-centered XYZ person. This is the XY, right? So everyone has a certain idea of who someone is, but once you kind of give them the benefit of the doubt, and you're like, okay, someone told me you're this and this, but I will for now assume that you're just someone who hasn't had like yet the opportunity to actually talk about the things you're really excited about. So that instead of asking you about like, oh, like, how's the business going, I'm asking you about like, hey, look, like, what's currently on your mind, what are you exploring, whatever it is. And then they might say, you know what, like, I always seem like an asshole because I'm actually really shy, and I just don't know how to act in social situations, and so people think I'm an idiot. But actually, there's so much I want to talk about, and then you start talking, and you're like, wow, this is the most amazing person in this room, right? And so I think it's those kind of things where, in a way, giving people the benefit of the doubt that everyone somehow has something inside, but we don't allow them usually to get it out, right? Because they're always in the context of their family or of some pre-existing relationship.
Right.
And I think allowing people to break out of that a little, and I'm such a big believer in this because I've been in this world kind of for quite some time through like different kind of correlations, and it's been fascinating to me how some people then go to extremes. So they go into drug use, or they go into like things that allow them to break out of what they're in, right? And I feel it's
Yeah.
much more exciting actually to allow them to break out in a beautiful way, which is just let them allow breaking out in like being the person they really want to be, versus like going on a concert for like a weekend, getting completely like, and then coming back into the world they don't like, right? Versus saying, no, like you can be in our world, but you can be the person you really want to be in this world. And I think that's the tough thing, right? That's not easy when you have like all these different structures and logics and patriarchs and matriarchs, so kind of like having their logics. But I think the opportunity at the moment is, right, like that we see a lot of kind of how can I say this diplomatically? A lot of generations now moving out more and more, right? Like just age-wise and so I think the new generation coming in, I think there's a lot more openness for those kind of things, and so I'm excited for this. I think there's much more in this, and I think just to flag this, I think communities like Nexus, for example, are just an amazing kind of community for that, like safe space to say, hey, look, like let allow you to, you don't have to be now the heir of XYZ. You're just the person here who's cool and interested in landscaping or gardening or environmental causes or whatever it is.
You know, it goes. You know, I'm about making things really simple. It's really about what I'm hearing is allowing people to feel emotionally safe enough to be themselves when they connect with you, and that's when they bring out who they really are, not the preconceived idea of who they should be. Because you know we tend to put ourselves in boxes as well. I have to be this way. I got to behave that way. That's my family's ways of being. We don't do this. We do this. And when we allow someone to just naturally open up, that's where the gems are going to be, and that's where we're going to really connect at a deep level.
Absolutely. And that's why I think it's so important to allow people spaces where they are not in the usual space, because I see that with myself, right? When I go back to my parents, I fall into old patterns, right? Because it's just like,
Yeah, you
that's
digress
the
into the child.
exactly right. And so it's really important then. That's why I mentioned Nexus, for example, and those kind of communities where you're like, you can now go here and you can it's almost like experimenting a little bit, who could I be, right? And then taking that back home and saying, you know what, I think I feel much more comfortable being this now than this, right? And so I think and to your point, that takes like this emotional support system and this kind of idea that you know, you're not alone out there, and that's always been my hope, right? Like, I'm a community builder at heart, and like my hope was always, look, usually the most interesting people are somehow considered crazy, right? Because they are in a way not just buying into this is exactly how the structure works, or this is exactly how the routines work, and so they are considered within their structures as crazy. But then when you connect them to other crazy people in other structures, right, then they come together, and that kind of gives them the support network to go back to their structures and say, you know what, actually you guys are crazy to still do the thing that you did since 50 years, and it actually doesn't make sense, right?
So what next for you, Kristen? You know, like what's the next project you're working on? What excites you? What's like, okay, what's the next thing I want to tackle here?
Well, look, I've spent kind of over 10 years working on how do you understand serendipity in different contexts, right? So everything from the CEO of XYZ big company to the social entrepreneur somewhere in the Cape Flats in Cape Town. And so I feel like we've learned a lot, especially also, by the way, from contexts of poverty, where out of necessity people create serendipity, right? Where a lot of times people are so resourceful that we can learn a lot from those contexts. And so my kind of next years are really focused on how can we take this mindset, the serendipity mindset, into as many schools, high schools, universities, companies, communities as possible, to really scale that and say, look, the unexpected and uncertainty doesn't only have to be a threat. It can be a source of joy, of meaning, of new relationships. And so really kind of in a way saying, we live in a world that's so polarized, and where a lot of people in power have the incentive to fractionize, right? And to say, you are this, we are this. To say, no, we have so much more in common. We have so many things that we can do together and connect so many dots, but we got to somehow, you know, bring that mindset in and those cultures in. And so I'm fully focused on that in the next few years. And, you know, it comes back to, on the impact side, I still remember, so one of the people that inspired me the most was, he's called Marlon Parker. So he's a social entrepreneur in the Cape Flats in Cape Town. And, you know, they do things like 10 steps to use social media to build your business, stuff like that, which then reaches hundreds of thousands of people with low cost education models. And I went there around 10 years ago, and I asked him, so what is a question, you know, me, the kind of white do-gooder coming to your context, shouldn't ask you, that all these other do-gooders that come into your context ask you all the time? And he was like, well, don't ask me as a first question, what do you need? Because if you ask me as a first question, what do you need? You put me into the role of the victim, the beneficiary, someone who needs your benevolence. And so we start with this asymmetry of you're being the one who helps me and
It's
you lift me
unequalized.
up,
It's an
right?
equalized relationship. Yeah.
Exactly. And so he was like, come in here and ask what's already here. What can we do together? Then we start on the same level, and then we can still kind of, you know, figure out the resourcing. Of course, we want the resources, but we want to start on the same level and not just be seen as liabilities. And that really stuck with me, because I always thought at the beginning when I started out, this is a lot about me helping people create, or me creating luck for other people, right? And then I realized, no, I want to be helping people create their own luck. And I think that's where it gets really exciting to say, how can we develop those opportunities for people that they can create their own lucks, right? It's the equivalent of, it's one thing to give someone a handout versus to actually help them get a job, right? It's similar logic, like how do you get someone a mentor and things like that allow them to have more serendipity happen in their life. So my next years will be focused a lot on that.
That's exciting. That's really, really exciting.
Thank you.
So we're coming to the end of the show, and it's flown by, as I knew it would, Christian. And I always ask my guests the same question. And the question is, based on your experience, your wisdom, and the book you've written, what's one piece of advice you can offer a senior generation family member and a next generation family member?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, because at the end of the day, so my answer would be the same for both, but slightly varied in the sense that it's very inspired by the Viktor Frankl idea that Viktor Frankl, he survived the Holocaust. He was in concentration camps, and he always wondered, how did I keep the hope? How did I keep the kind of the will to live, right? Because there was objectively no meaning whatsoever being in this place. And he kind of created meaning, right? He said, I will create meaning. I will still talk with people tomorrow here in the camps to make them feel better. Now I have a reason to wake up tomorrow morning, like a micro meaning. And I also still want to write this book when I get out here, so I have a macro meaning here too. And so that's kind of like, as a patriarch, matriarch, or someone who kind of like is the person people look up to, I've always been very excited about this idea. Can you help people have both that macro meaning in terms of this is where we're going as a family, as a business, as a collective, but then also the micro meaning in terms of when you go into the office on Monday morning, do you feel it? Do you feel that it's there, or is it disconnected, right? Do we have all these family values, but they don't mean anything in the day to day, right? And so it's really kind of creating that connect between the macro and the micro meaning. And I think as a senior leader, that's kind of what you can do. And then as a junior leader, I think it's really about this Frankl idea. What can we control, right? And the underlying notion of this is a lot about, let's focus on the things we can control, and we can't control that we are in a certain family structure, maybe where it's at the moment kind of just what it is, right? Like we might not be happy about that this is what it is, but okay, that we cannot necessarily control that at all. But maybe we can control what we do with it. Like, and I've been so inspired by some of my friends, right, who say, hey, look, we have XYZ resources now, and so let me connect with the right communities here to do something that feels meaningful to me too. And so I find here a nice intersection between what my family wants to do in the long run, but also what I find really meaningful in the long run. And so I think it's really focusing on that kind of, what can I control in the setting that I'm in? And I think that kind of is where serendipity starts to happen, that you say, you know what, you can't always control each situation, but you can control what you do with it. And I think that kind of, in a way, gives you that agency to move forward, I think.
Brilliant answer. Brilliant. So, Christian, if people want to find you and, learn more about you, maybe hire you, buy your books, have you for speaking engagement, how do they find you?
Easiest way might be via LinkedIn. That's kind of probably the easiest. And then the homepage is theserendipitymindset.com. And I'd be delighted to continue that conversation, Frank. I think what you've been doing is great. Also, connecting a lot of different dots, and so looking forward to continuing those conversations.
Christian, thank you so much. It's been a real honor and a privilege to have you on the show. Again, folks, here's a copy of the book. Fabulous read. Highly recommend you get it, read it, and start applying it. So, listeners, as you know, guests donate their time, their wisdom, and their experience to the show for you, because, as we know, this is a lonely place being part of a family business, particularly Next Gen. So we are connecting dots here, so to speak, for you with other experts, other folks in the space. So please connect the dots and share the show with your friends so they don't feel alone as well. Christian, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you on.
Thank you so much.